Hello, this is Jim, and I wanted to say a few words about Parries. That's been my theme lately, and sticking to that. I had some questions this weekend about the variation in parries. Like, why do we have different types of parry 3? Why do we have different types of parry 5 or head parries? These are good questions. And for my student, he's been doing this a while, and we've looked at lately at a lot of different guards in particular, high guards, low guards, different types of third. Um, Partly this is just because it's fun. And the other reason is that it familiarizes them with different styles of fencing. And this is one of the things about historical fencing, I think, that keeps it dynamic and interesting is that, and this is not to poo poo, Olympic fencing at all. I have a lot of respect for it. There's a more homogenized style to Olympic fencing for a variety of reasons. It's not that it doesn't change, it's not that there's some variation, but for the most part, you're working towards a certain set of conditions to achieve a win, and that's going to affect how you fence. When I was competing way back when, it looked very different than it does now. I probably had more in common with the 1950s, but anybody fencing in the 1950s would look at me fencing in the 80s and 90s and be like, yeah, what are they doing? It's always a little different, right? But the big difference with historical fencing is that you have these texts that come from vastly different contexts. And so one of the things I told my student was that, what he's learning primarily are things that I've learned where I was taught. And so we work a lot from Barbasetti. Barbasetti was a student of Radielli. Radielli was a cavalryman. So in origin, that system was meant for mounted combat. It works perfectly well on foot. They perfected it for that as well. But that's an important piece to remember. And it's one expression of cavalry. I had the good fortune to work with Leo Majanowski in Prague last year. And if you get a chance to work with Leo and his team, they're awesome. They do some like 17th century Hussar stuff out of Krakow. And it was interesting. He put me in the Hussar, flying Hussar, with the wings. The armor was too small for me, which was comic but fun. The thing that threw me though is that he had us sit kind of on a gymnastics horse and cut in a pumpkin, but I've got these wings behind me, and these wings have very expensive eagle feathers on them. Eagle feathers I'm not sure I could replace easily, so I was very keen not to hurt his equipment. And he was nice enough to let me try it on. It was hard, and Pavel and a couple other people, you could see them kind of cringe every time I swung because they was like, "Oh, he's going to hit it again." I was not very good. But what's interesting is that, my instincts are if I parry with my head and I'm cutting in a pumpkin over there, I'm going to come down, with this Molinello. You can't do that with wings behind you, right? You're going to hit them. And so they have a different way of making those cuts from those different parries. That's a different context, right? So if you're working with Leo and his group, you're going to learn a slightly different way of doing that. Just as acceptable, it's just different. If you're working with dedicated infantry systems, right, that's going to be a little bit different. And we have all kinds of ways of defending ourselves. There's the extended third, retracted third, high third. Some people use second. Some people use a middle guard. So there are a lot of different ways that people that do this. And that's really the big answer, is that there are different types of third because there are different types of using sabers. And I, in class, use more than one, and I do this for a couple of reasons. One, it's fun. But two, and I think kind of where I wanted to go with this, is that from a competitive point of view, from a fencing with other kinds of people point of view, the more you're exposed to, the less you'll be surprised, right? And so, again, unlike Olympic fencing, and this is not a dig, it's just the recognition of differences, you can learn a pretty good modern third, and you're going to be fine pretty much everywhere, all things being equal. But what if you're in a HEMA or historical fencing tournament and you see a guard you're not familiar with? And this can happen. A lot of clubs are in very small places that don't have a lot of other, clubs around them. It can be very isolating. And so if all you've ever done is use a retracted third, and that's third, that's the third it's the third everybody does, and all of a sudden you see somebody in high third, you may not know what to do. And that's okay, right? But if you're fencing and you're competing and you want to do a good job, you want to have a certain presence of mind. What you don't want to have are lots of moments where you have a question mark of like, what are they doing? Because by the time you've asked that question, they may have hit you. So one of the reasons that I expose students to different systems and encourage them to study with other coaches is so that they learn these differences. And there's a good and a bad time to do that. I do not do that with new students. New students, it helps to have a system, a sort of framework against which to compare everything. And within that, some familiarity, some comfort. And so it's usually a year or two down the line, but I'll say, hey, you should go work with so-and-so. And if that's not available for some reason, then, I'll introduce something in class for it. So, as a coach, you have to kind of consider those things. But in general, there's an advantage to learning these different types of parries because you never know what you're going to meet. And the more comfortable you are with it, the more it looks familiar, the less of an issue it is, right? If I get on this strip or the circle or whatever we're fighting in, and I see something that I am not familiar with, that increases my difficulty in an already difficult situation. Whereas if I recognize it, oh, it's just high third, oh, that's middle guard, and I know something about how to deal with it, then that's that much less stress. That's that much less anxiety about it. And that just helps you fight better. Calm is a superpower. And so the more we can do to cultivate that, the better. And part of that is just being familiar with what's out there, which is a much harder job in historical fencing. And especially with saber, which is increasingly popular and quite varied. I tend to think of that as a good thing. I like the variety. I think it's really cool. But that's why we have different parries, context, different context for use. So hope that's helpful. If it's not, let me know. If you have questions, let me know. I'll leave the comments on. If you have nasty things to say, I probably won't pay attention. I don't really care. Just trying to help. But happy to chat if you want to. Thanks.